Welcome out. Yes, this is my hand, not that. It looks like I have a ginormous hand. Yes. Welcome. We're here with a bit of an update for the community challenge, and we thought that we would discuss some of the ways that people tend to get rejected, because this first pass in this community challenge, that's that easy. Okay, did it really fit in? Did it really work? Before you really dive deep. So what are those quick red flags that we think about that tend to, ruffle our feathers? And I have the whole AutoCrit team here with me, or at least a lot of them. I have Gareth and Catherine and Beth. So hey, everybody.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey.
Awesome. And we have people here from all over. We've got South Africa and Houston, Texas, and Seattle and Massachusetts and Florida. And that's awesome. Fantastic.
A lot of our team are in Florida also. So,
Yes.
I sense a meetup, an in-person meetup coming.
Florida party.
You can grab some coffee and talk about story development. It's my favorite thing to do.
Just edit.
Just edit. You can have a live edit in.
Oh goodness.
So I don't know if you wanted to kick things off, Gareth, with a little bit of a behind the scenes update of what is going on in our community challenge, because I know we have so many people out there that are anxiously waiting at their keyboards trying to figure out what's going on. Am I still in? Am I out? What's up? What's going on, Gareth?
Indeed. Well, let me make myself bigger here. I've been working on my app.
That's what you've been doing during the community challenge. It was a community challenge, not a fitness challenge, but you're always trying to one up us.
Quarantine bod. That's not how quarantine bod is supposed to work out.
Yeah, that was not my quarantine bod, let me tell you.
The One Punch Man workout challenge. Well, okay, so yeah, an update. We want to kind of keep everybody in the loop because, as you all know, if you were taking part in the challenge and saw our closing stream too, we had a lot of entries. I did just shy of 260 entries, and after this first round, we kind of went through and thought, what would be really useful for this month? I don't want to give too many spoilers right away, but focusing on these kind of things that will really catch the eye of either a publisher or an agent. And when I say publisher, I also mean magazines, periodicals, even just open for an anthology story, that kind of thing. Not necessarily novels, but it is kind of universal across them all. The three things that we've come up with anyway, that will get you over that first hurdle, because the first hurdle is really the best place to put a lot of focus. So we'll get to those three. But to keep everybody in the loop on where we stand, the preliminary round is over. Of those circa 260 entries, we are down to 70 on the long list. That's 7-0. Of course, all being blind judged, we do not currently know kind of who any of the pieces are from. So unfortunately, I can't join in this stream and go, you're in the long list, you're in the long list. So to Oprah it up. But
I have some of the people right here behind me,
Yes. Yeah, that one looks familiar. Yes.
Yes. We're in the X Factor
Right.
blind audition.
But it just goes to show, Gareth, what you were talking about, because what that number differential, those are so many people that probably did not follow some of the things we're going to talk about today, and therefore easily eliminated themselves.
Yes, some of the things are a couple of things anyway. It can be tough. It's not. We all know, we're writers. When you're submitting to people, rejection it's almost a way of life. And you kind of have to just get used to it. So it's super tough, and these things can be really, really hard. So you just put as much as you can into each of these three things to get over that initial level. But 70. So now we are on to round 2 with 70, going through with the judges again, and we will most likely knock that down by maybe half again, and then continue to put more work in. So the judging is still going to take time. We are hoping to announce the final selection, which should be 10, maybe a little more, for the grand prize at the end of the month. I think we currently have scheduled in June 29th potentially on a live stream. But again, we will make sure to keep everybody informed, so you don't have that done. You're like, I'm going to find out if I won on June 29th, and then be all disappointed when we're like, oh, it's taking us too long. We will keep you informed, but that's the preliminary date for now.
Sounds great. Sounds great. And I see Melissa's like, that looks like you. Well, I don't know. I can't tell you. It's blind judging. So it's very, very possible. But speaking to what Gareth was talking about, you know, the three things we're going to talk about today are really those things that you can learn, things that you can work on, and, you know, avoid just quickly getting that red flag and not making it past that first hurdle. You don't want to, you know, not make it out of the entrance gate, right? So let's get started talking about these things, shall we? Yes. How about not following guidelines?
I was going to say, would anybody like to make a guess what the first one might be? I'm sure we would see a lot of that.
So this is the first one. Everybody put your guesses for the second one in the comments.
There we go. Yeah, two more. So you got a chance of figuring out what the other two are. Play along. So who wants to speak of not following guidelines?
Yeah. You know, this is one of these things that it kind of everybody would expect in reality should actually be simpler than it sounds. But turns out a lot of the time for many people it isn't, for some reason. But yes, not following the guidelines laid out is something that, regardless of the situation, if we go back to whether it's, you know, an agent that you're approaching, it would be a publisher for your novel potentially, or somebody who has opened up a call for an anthology. Not following the guidelines to the letter is the number one thing that will. I mean, that's probably like, if you're thinking of it as a hurdle race and you're running towards the first hurdle, is you've kind of face planted before you even reached that first hurdle.
The first one.
You didn't even show up wearing it. It's like you showed up without an outfit on. Like, it's like you're really not like in it at all. Like you forgot your shoes.
Sneakers have failed you.
Yeah, right.
very, very quickly. Or think of it as well as, I guess, because it's up to the individual who's looking at it, is that you kind of pulled a little bucket or a packet of oil out of your pocket and just poured it in front of yourself and immediately slipped on it and injured yourself. So yes, the not following guidelines.
Loving all these metaphors.
When it came to our particular set of guidelines, again, you know, they weren't particularly stringent. So I see comments, for example, stuff like the genre. We did not ask for genre. We're completely genre independent. But much the same thing. You will often find a lot of anthologies, a lot of publications for certain runs are looking for either a specific genre or a specific theme. It might be, this should be set in the 1980s and revolve around cars. It's like, because that's the theme of this print. And then you send a sci-fi set in 2158 that has nothing to do with cars.
Right.
It's immediately being thrown away. Now, the thing that I want to really stress about guidelines, because I know a lot of people kind of think, I would rather not submit it, say, in this size or with this spacing because that's uncomfortable for me. By all means, when you're writing it and editing it and doing whatever it is you need to do with the piece, keep it in whatever formatting you like. There's nothing stopping you. But before you send it, put it into the formatting that is required.
Yes.
Right. Even things, most submission guidelines they're very much worth following line by line on the guidelines page of wherever it is you're submitting to, because each line will often be one extra point of what it is that they want. And that could even come down to naming conventions on the file, is your file should be named title, your name, - word count. Some may want it in the file title or anything like that. Now, again, these are not arbitrary things. A lot of them are built into the guidelines for publishers because they require that systematic approach to it to actually keep control of all. Remember, we said earlier, this is a very cutthroat, very busy business to be in. So rejection is just ever present. And that's simply because of the amount of work that the publishers have to go through, the amount they're receiving every single day and every time they put out a call. And things like naming conventions as well might seem silly to you. And you think, well, my file is what it is. I'll throw it over. And if they like it, they like it. It's a great piece of work. I'm sure they'll pick it up. No, they won't. because if you are acting outside of their systems, you're causing them problems. They're not going to bother even looking at it. In something like a naming convention that you don't stick to, well, then your email is deleted. The file doesn't even get opened. You have not crossed that first hurdle. And also part of the reason for that too, even though it may be frustrating, is that a lot of publishers and agents and, well, everybody in the industry essentially also uses this as an indication of whether you're somebody who can A, take direction, B, will be good to work with, and C, is also open to correction in that sense. It's kind of weird. It's like, well, I understand that you might be open to correction because you followed my orders. It feels like a kind of a non sequitur, but it's actually true, because then they kind of understand that, yes, this person is in this for the right reasons. They're doing everything they should be doing. And that means that if our editor has to say to them, maybe we should lose this scene, it's not going to be a massive drama. There will be, an easy person to work with, not just in a systematic sense, but in a professional and emotional sense.
Yeah.
So if anyone else has any words to say about guidelines, let me put you in the spotlight.
One thing I can say about guidelines is I think that word can sometimes be a bit, because often in conversation, when we talk about a guideline, it's like we have rules and we have guidelines. But often when they say guidelines, they really just mean rules. They're just putting it in a more diplomatic way. So don't think of them as guidelines. Think of them as hard rules that you can't break under penalty of death. It's probably a better way of looking at it. Just as an author, don't let that word trip you up. And then the other thing is, to Gareth's point, when I think of so many different things, like in the world, there's people that talk about, the musician that requires, red M&Ms in their dressing room. They're like, oh, that's so picky. But sometimes they do that just because they want to see, have they read all of the requirements for my setup, which include a lot of safety things, which could bother me. And I'm just checking. And so some of the rules may be a bit arbitrary, but just for the standpoint of knowing that. But most of the time they're not. They're so that the publisher, the editor, whoever is you're submitting to can process your information. And a lot of times you're dealing with people that have just so much volume that if they can't put it into formats that are easily dealt with, they're just, they can't keep up with it. So they have to actually work like that.
Yeah. And I want to add, I'm looking through the comments. So while this does tie in very great for timing for our short story contest, this is ultimately a video to help people who are pitching works or considering pitching works, whether that's to an anthology, as we said earlier, or your actual book too. This is not specific to the AutoCrit challenge. So if you're watching the replay, these are still 3 red flags that could get you rejected. So we're just using this sort of to help you out as people who do this a lot in the industry. But I think these have all been really great points. And I would add to, make sure when you're checking for things that you're pitching, as far as guidelines, which is the opposite of the pirate's definition of guidelines. These are the actual
they're more
rules.
like guidelines. It's like,
these are more like rules.
Yeah, they're more like actual rules.
Is whether or not they're even accepting too. That falls in there usually right above the guidelines. You'll see a whole page of here's how we want it formatted, and here's how many words, and here's the genres that I represent, and here's what we want. And then at the top it'll say currently accepting submissions, currently closed to submissions. That counts as a guideline too. So keep your eye out for.
But it's true. And then even beyond that, they'll say like, I'm not accepting certain things because there's often a glut in the marketplace where everybody jumps on a bandwagon like, oh, Hunger Games was so big, let's all write dystopia. And then they're like, nope, we can't sell this anymore. There's too much. And I won't look at it, if that's what you're writing. So
I can see from what you said about the guidelines and rules, it makes me think of, I don't know if it's a popular meme in the US, but in the UK it is, where it shows like a cyclist and it's like, oh, traffic laws? You mean traffic guidelines?
It's true. It's true.
Just to catch up with a few of the comments and things that are going through there. Again, as we go through all of these, everybody, per usual with our live streams, pop comments, pop questions in as we go. Anything you like, we'll catch up with you. Saika, I didn't see any of that in the instructions for the contest. We were very kind. We didn't put ours restricted all that much. Maybe next time we will be a bit more, I guess, potentially sneaky about it. We'll do the red M&Ms thing at some point, just to to see if that works. But yeah, no, there wasn't really anything too strict in ours. Lynn, kind of same answer to you. Do you mean when we submit a story, the title of the actual file should be the title, name, etc.? If that is what is asked for in the guidelines, then you do what is asked for in the guidelines. Otherwise, if there's nothing in the guidelines to say what the file should be called, well, then just call it the title of the story. That's what I would do, probably. But it's down to the guidelines.
Yeah. And sometimes the guidelines is like last name, first name, underscore, what, there's a very specific way, and it's just so they can organize, because they don't want to have to go in and rename every file when they're getting thousands of files. It's just, they'll just delete it. They won't even look at it. Garrett, we were very kind. Garrett sounded very restrained, like he was balancing the axe behind his back.
Definitely, Gareth and I talk a lot with our friend Jeff Brown, who runs Cohesion Press, based in Australia, and they have a very specific standard by which they need naming conventions in the file names a very specific way, because they just get inundated. And that is, for Jeff, the first hurdle. If I open your email and it's not like the file name isn't, I'm not going to go through and rename 10,000 or 100,000 or even 100 files to make it fit. So it's very real. Just do read those guidelines. I would maybe say even requirements. Maybe
there we go.
We'll change our verbiage next time. Just
It's like changing the industry one day at a time. Submission requirements.
It's like, just think of it like in the real world. It's like you've submitted your manuscript, but it's like super glued, and they have to like open it up with an X-Acto knife. It's like, why would you want to make it hard for them to do it? Like they have these things in place that sometimes seem pointless, but they often have a good reason for it. All right, wait, did you see that?
Oh no! Spoiler.
I meant, but if somebody did guess that it was spelling was the next one. But for any of you who did not catch that really quick, maybe you did. What do you think the next one is? Because I forgot before I showed it for a second.
I'm gonna plead the fifth.
I'm gonna see how many people can read quick.
Oh.
While we're waiting there, I noticed, Bob, do you know how many got rejected for not following guidelines in this contest? I couldn't say. I know personally, being involved in the first round, I think there were only 3 rejections for word count, which I was actually really impressed with, because we had 5,000 words as the max. Of course, we did allow a little over that. There's always a bit of leeway. I was just saying that if it was over 6,000, of course it was going to go. But only 3 out of nearly 260 that were just too far above 5,000 to be considered. So that was excellent.
That's great.
All right. Weak opening hook. Yes, some people figured it out. I wonder how you did it. It's magic. All right. Hopefully that was a good opening hook for the second one.
Speaking of good opening hooks, the quote from, I think it was Jack, about Gareth with an axe behind his back, that would be an interesting opening hook.
Right? I like that. The editor that's sick of people not following guidelines and goes on a murdering spree.
Get away with opening with dialogue. Let me ask you a question.
Oh. Starting with a dad joke is maybe not the best opening hook.
That is for me.
Unless you're writing middle grade.
I kind of feel like it's
or for Gareth. Well, now you know, everybody. Okay. You know how to get in. You know how to get in with one of the judges. Starting with a dad joke, as long as Gareth's reading.
Tyka and Bob all in the comments like, "Yep, I'd read that." Ha, yes.
Actually, starting with humor does tend to work well. So I'm being a little bit facetious in that. It can work very well. Anybody else want to speak to weak opening hooks?
I'd love to talk about weak opening hooks.
I know. You know all about weak opening hooks, don't you?
That is my wheelhouse. I mean, anybody who's ever had something read by me is like, I will massacre your first sentence and it'll be so much better. But no, seriously, there's a lot of really, really good hooks. What you're really looking for in a hook is to tell the reader why they should keep reading. In a nutshell, it's like you have one sentence, and that one sentence is going to determine whether or not they read anything else in your whole work. So whether you use that sentence to be a setup for who I'm following through the story and what the type of story is, if I haven't read the blurb, like in this case, there were no covers, so I couldn't pick up a cover image and go, oh, that looks cool. You've got 1 to 2 sentences max usually to hook somebody. So you should give them something about the story, something about the character, and then what kind of story they're reading. So I think my example of a weak opening hook that I see a lot is scene setting in your first 2 sentences, as opposed to throwing us into a reason to read. Things about the weather, things about what the character looks like, things about the character's job. How many of us really want to read a whole book about somebody's job? Unless it's unless they have a really super awesome job, like the editor axe murderer that we were just talking about for Garrett's next project to write. But anyway, like seriously though, give us something more unique than that. You want to watch out for falling into Once Upon a Time, sort of the
dark and stormy night,
right? The antique style of writing, especially if you're trying to pitch it for the current audience. You can go look up books that are selling really well in your genre and pull them open and look at the first couple sentences, and then tell yourself, would I read this whole book based on just these first 2 sentences, and compare them to your first 2 sentences. But my biggest thing is stay away from scene setting with your first 2 sentences and save that for the 3rd, 4th paragraph further down the page. And the other, as we've already said, is starting with dialogue is almost always a taboo. I've seen a couple that were really intriguing, but most of the time you save dialogue for like the 2nd sentence or further on down. I think, Gareth, you were mentioning that earlier too.
Yeah, dialogue. I'm a bit of a, well, you say it's kind of contentious these days. So I'm not an outlier or anything. I think it's kind of 50-50 split, but I have no problem with dialogue opening as long as the dialogue is intriguing. And it's the same thing with any first line. Is the first line intriguing? What I like to call good questions. Does it lead to good questions? And a good question is the what and the why, and a story hook, something that's got you interested, that's got you a little invested right from the beginning in knowing more. Bad questions are, what's that supposed to mean? Or isn't that a bit redundant? Anything like that to start with. For example, as Catherine said, with like scene setting, you could have a first line that's something like, this just came to my head, so I'm looking at what's on my shelves here for names of places, but, Wolverine Bay was a sad and lonely place. It's kind of, okay, I sort of get it. But if you have an opening line that's something like, nobody ever stopped twice on the way through Wolverine Bay, well, then you're like, oh, right, there's a lot more questions wrapped up into that. Why? What is it with this place? And you want to move on. You want to move on to the next.
This whole conversation reminds me of one from our last year's anthology. And the 2 opening sentences here are, you know exactly which one this is going to be, Gareth. The smell of brewing coffee coaxed my eyes open. Then my house exploded. That's the whole first paragraph, right? Right? And that was last year when we picked these. That was such a grab. Like, that hook was phenomenal. And we're like, absolutely reading on about this. So just those first 2 sentences. And the first one was like, okay, coffee seems slow and lazy, and then massive action follow that. So, yeah.
So sometimes your first line doesn't need to blow the doors off, but follow it up with something really inventive immediately afterwards. Again, it grabs your attention so hard that there's really no option but to read on.
Yeah.
Now, of course, it does depend a lot on, I suppose, the editor and the person you're working with as well, whether they will give you a couple of paragraphs, let's say, to hook, to get something going. But more often than not, you really, really want to put the effort to make that first line or those first couple of lines something really interesting. As much effort as you can into those is a really, really high reward place of focus. when you're getting that story wrapped up. Again, that can all come in editing. You can simply get the story out of you, come back to it, rearrange the beginning, just to make that beginning really pop. Because again, on a publisher's desk or an agent's desk, they're probably working with either they have readers on staff or interns who are just there to look through the slush pile and read things, and they do not stop. They don't sit there, and they may ask for 10 pages, let's just say, but they may not sit there and read those 10 pages. That's never a guarantee.
Yeah.
And if they're just like, nope, first few lines, knock out, it's not got it. It's gone.
And with that being said too, you need to make sure you're doing your first chapter opening sentence. I have seen so many books where they send in, my pitch is being rejected, and I open it, and the first line of the prologue or the intro or the opening is fantastic. But the agents usually, in my experience for fantasy, they don't want your prologue, and they won't even ask for your prologue until after they read your first chapter and like it. So if you have a strong prologue opening, and then you go to chapter 1 and it's a meh opening that relies on the prologue to be strong, you might want to consider strengthening the hook of your chapter 1 opening, because not all readers are going to read your prologue, which is like astounding for an author, but it's true.
I know, right?
So they're going to say, okay, how strong is the pitch of the opening sentence? So if you're doing a prologue, you almost need 2 hook sentences, the hook for your prologue for the people who do read it, and then the hook for the first chapter.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think anytime you switch point of views or time frame, you kind of have to think about grabbing the audience. So yeah, if your prologue is like the monster is coming scene, and then you're switching to, oh, the boy is on his farm, and we know eventually they're going to go together, but you still need to hook you on the boy and his farm, even though there's that looming terror coming, because that's just, otherwise you're going to be like, okay, I want to get back to the cool monster,
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing can happen whenever you switch point of views throughout your work. We had a couple of comments. One comment was dialogue doing scene setting, as if they found that concept confusing. But no, dialogue absolutely can do scene setting. I mean, think of movies; they do it all the time, or plays do it even more than that, because they often don't have much of a scene. Sometimes they literally have a black box, and they have to talk to things to tell you where you're at. But I'm thinking of, be careful when you go up the stairs because he's hungry, and it's like, that's a scene because there's a staircase and there's something underneath it, and it's, that's a scene setting sort of thing. So absolutely you can do that in dialogue. Mm-hmm. And then, how important is a punchy ending versus a punchy opening, or are the two exclusive? Ooh. I would say they are not exclusive, and I would say if you have to pick one or the other, the punchy opening is absolutely what you have to pick, because people will forgive a weak ending, but they'll never get started with a weak opening. But don't do it. Just make both punchy.
Yeah, exactly right. From the perspective of kind of pitching things, and especially shorts, what we're talking about, in the context of a short story submission in a challenge or a publication and things like that, punchy endings are always welcome. Because, as Daniel said, a great ending is a great ending. But yes, weak endings can be forgiven, but they won't even be read if nobody gets there. You really put the most effort in the front, because the thing is, as well, if somebody runs with a submission, if somebody starts to read your thing and they're getting all the way through it, an agent or a publisher invests themselves enough in it to finish it, and they're thinking the whole way, oh man, this has something, this has what I'm going for. They're also then more apt to think, it needs a bit of editing, it needs a bit of tweaking here and there, but I'm willing to work with the author to get it in the final shape. The same goes for a lot of short story publications, and also anthologies. It's not you have to send it to me and that's the final form, accept it or leave it. It's I will also work with you. We have editors that will edit out anything that needs fixing. I think just about every submission everywhere ends up with at least one typo somewhere in it. So something as simple as a typo is not going to get you completely rejected. So that's why it's worth putting all that effort in the beginning, just to get them hooked right away and interested. Because the more they invest by reading it, the more apt or more likely they are to think, yeah, I'm actually invested in making this perfect.
And don't make your ending hooky. That's a difference between a hook and, you want it to be an attractive ending and a resolved satisfying ending. But unless it's a series, like for a short story like this, you don't want to leave your reader feeling like, but wait, what happened? Because they're never going to get anything else. And that's so disappointing.
Right.
So you definitely want a like strong, satisfying ending. But unless you have other stories that are coming out to back it up, avoid the temptation to go, but there could be more if there's nothing actually anymore.
If, in fact, there's no more.
Especially if it doesn't resolve if it's a conflict that's not resolved, right? Because it's one thing to be like, the consequences of this could be really cool. That's pretty acceptable because you're like, oh, that just lets me imagine what the next step is. Versus it's like you're playing a song and you just cut it off and you're like, but the chord. Oh, I mean, that's a musician me. I'm like, unresolved chords drive me bananas. Now, somebody said that they've heard it said that you remember the opening of novels and the ending of movies. This is kind of interesting point, and that is, I believe that the film industry is shifting on this because of the way that the medium is being presented. So hear me out. This is me theorizing based on what I'm seeing, and that is that previously people generally entered a movie from a trailer where they were really super excited about it, and they'd get sat down, and the odds of them walking out was not very high because they had the promise of this really cool scene that they were going to get to. That has shifted because if you go on Netflix, all you get is like a picture. It's like a book cover, and I think what you're seeing is that there is more emphasis being placed on the openings of movies and TV than there were before, and I think you will see that medium shift. So I understand why you're saying that, Bob, but I think that it will not be the case in the future. Anyway, just kind of a weird aside.
Brad, should each chapter have an opening hook? I've heard that's desirable. Also, every story has to have a twist, but that seems like a twist would become cliche. Yeah, for the second thing, I would say every story does not have to have a twist. If you can pull off a good twist, by all means do it. But twists for the sake of having twists is just contrived and very, very easily seen. Should each chapter have an opening hook? Yeah, I would agree that each chapter should be as strong in the opening as possible. And also, Doree is quite right to leave them needing to read on at the end of the chapter as well. So your chapter endings kind of have what I call an exit hook that's kind of pulling you through to the next chapter. And then that chapter begins with a nice hooky sentence. And you just kind of repeat that. It's more familiar, I guess, in the thriller genre where chapters are going to be shorter and people are just like breathlessly going through and through and through. One of the books that I always point out for this is one that I read last year, Ruth Ware's The Turn of the Key, which, while I don't think is ultimately a fully satisfying, fantastic thriller, it's a masterclass in that kind of ending a chapter and pulling people through to the next one and just keeping them going. Just fabulous book to study for that technique, even if you're not a fan of the way the story works, you know.
Yep. Yeah, I have James Dashner's The Maze Runner is the same thing for me. Like, that's just a book that just, you're gripped all the way through. I didn't ultimately like where it went, but it, like, I had to finish it. Like, it just constantly it was like, and then this happened. I'm like, wait, what does that mean? Oh, and this happened. What does that mean? You know, things like that.
Jeanette
all right, before
says, she had one last good one about an editor telling you to make your hook opening into a prologue. So as an editor, and I'm sure Daniel and Gareth have experienced this too, I typically don't recommend people to turn opening sentences into prologues unless your opening sentence follows somebody in a place and time totally disconnected from the entire rest of your chapter one, which is sort of what a prologue is. It's like you open the sentence with, I read a famous one that's trending lately. The building was burning and it wasn't my fault. And then the next paragraph skips to 5 years later. Like, okay, that was a nice hook, but maybe that should have been a whole prologue scene. That's not actually what happens in the book. It's just an example. But typically, from an editing perspective, I would say, you know, you should tie your first chapter in so that it flows naturally with the rest of the chapter. It should follow the same person unless you're head hopping mid-chapter. And if you want to tie in a first sentence of a prologue to a last sentence of your book, that's definitely your choice. I don't really see any issues with that. It might be a nice bonus for the people who do take the time to read the prologue. I don't know.
Yeah, it sounds to me like the editor is thinking in the sense that I really like this technique. It's very cool how your first line ties directly into the last line, and what they're trying to do is just pull that forward a little to make that more obvious, so people will really appreciate it. But I would say as much as that is cool in function, it's make sure it makes sense for the actual storytelling as well. Because if you pull that line into a prologue and leave it, but then your starting line at chapter 1 is now weak, you've just caused yourself problems.
Right. Yeah, if it's a thematic thing, like, it's some sort of opening image, like, I don't know, it's, somebody is looking at the stars, and then the end of it is they've been to space and they've like conquered that, and that's how it ties together. I'm just giving an analogy. Then it could be that the person wants you to bring that up a little bit more, but maybe a prologue is not the best way of doing it. Is if your first chapter is already well paced, I might look at other ways to bring up that theme somewhere else versus potentially slowing down the beginning. It could also be that what they're getting at is that they feel that you actually have thrust people too much into action before they kind of have the grounding of where they're at or something like that. Which can happen, as much as we tell people never to information dump. On the other hand, if you have no idea what's going on, it can be disorienting. So
ask your editor. Go back and ask your editor, what did you mean?
What do you mean by that? All right, before we go to our third red flag, I'm just curious what people might think it is. That's your little hook for the next chapter in our live session here.
While they're thinking, just one last thing on that second point as well is, of course, working with editors, as we're talking about, working with editors and taking their suggestions on board. Editors are people. They have different approaches. They like different things as well. So of course a different editor might suggest doing things a different way, and that's why it's always worth throughout your career, getting connected with as many as you can and trying and seeing, because sometimes if you just don't see eye to eye, well, then it's not worth agreeing in a creative manner. These things, quote unquote, creative differences cause splits across creative industries all the time, and that's not necessarily to say that anyone is wrong, objectively in any particular situation. But sometimes as well, some of the feedback you might get from editors, if you don't just get a form rejection, it could simply be I'm just not feeling it. And sometimes that feels like the worst kind of feedback to get from anybody, because it's like, well, give me a reason. Sometimes I'm not feeling it is actually a reason, and it's a good reason to revisit the beginning.
It's so true. It's true.
So always think about that. The very punchy beginning. If you hear people say to you, I'm just not feeling it, I mean, it's well written, it's good, the first chapter is it's good, but I'm just not feeling it. It might just be that very, very first moment you didn't hook them, but they realized as they were reading on that it's actually well-written piece, and they were starting to enjoy it.
Yeah, it's a great point. And that first sentence will tell them whether it's something they want to represent or feel comfortable representing a million times to other publishers. If you're going to an agent and they got to represent the book, they're going to have to use your same hook over and over and over again. We're all people. We all have our own preferences. We have renowned classics like Lord of the Rings. There are people that love it, and there are people that are like, I don't feel it. But that doesn't make it any less quality of a book.
Right.
And then there's people that like it, and people who feel like, could I represent it as a job? So.
Yeah. And then there's a class of people that, like it, but they wouldn't really be able to edit it, because it's like, I can tell it's good, but I can't really I can't break it apart mechanically. I can't do that because I just don't think like that. It's not my thing, So there's just so many different ways that editing and writing can be affected by the work itself. All right, so we've got some different guesses. Underdeveloped characters, that's always a good one. Never don't use a dream sequence. Yeah, dream sequence is probably not a great idea. Horrible dialogue, jumping tenses, spelling mistakes, things that have been done to death, too much backstory. All right, so got a lot of different things. I do like this comment, though. I'm just going to delay this for the sake of suspense. But Vicky says, consider your writing self an actor on a stage. The director is the editor. I do like that.
Love it.
That's a great analogy, I think. And we all know that there are some really great actors and some really great directors you could never put in the same room because it would be a disaster. So just remember that too.
Yes.
All right. So number 3 is Immediate repetitious language or repetitious language. I can't even say anything. I'm going to repeat it. Immediate repetitious language. Immediate repetitious language. All right. You can see where this gets annoying really quickly, right?
Say it 10 times fast.
Right.
I can't even say it one time
or
slowly.
IRL, as we say in the biz. No, we don't. I just made that up. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Gareth.
Yeah, so this one, I can see some, I'll call it some of the comments towards the end, because there are a few there that are probably like numbers 4 and 5.
You're on the right track.
Yeah.
You're only picking for this one. We might get into them a little bit later.
If you put all three of these things together, this is essentially what's going to stand out to anybody reading it, and we're talking within moments of opening that file. Anybody who is considering you for, again, representation or submission, within moments. And when it comes to, of course, following the guidelines, that is moments before your file has even been opened. So these are first few paragraphs. If the thing is immediately filled with repetition of language, it's going to go in the bin. Now, the reason for this, again, it comes down to, well, better than rapacious language, yes.
That's true. Thank you, Jonathan.
The thing with the repetition, if it immediately crops up, and we're talking first 3-4 paragraphs, I'm starting to get very annoyed by the amount of obvious repetition. Again, let me always put the caveat with repetition to the side. Repetition not intended for obvious effect.
Right.
is telling me that this is going to need more editing than I care to do immediately. Because again, if it's the hook hasn't got me, it's been repetitious, I'm just like, okay, I'm not going to bother with the rest of this. When I say immediate repetitious language, again, this is the sort of thing beginning with the sky was dark. He looked at the sky, saw that the stars were, looked like they were falling from the sky. And we just have sky, 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 this, sky, that. Some that I've seen before in the past that obviously stand out too were things like a character driving a car or getting into the car. They unlock the car, they open the car door, they get in the car, they turn on the car. It's just car. And it's immediate, first 3 paragraphs, immediate sign that this is not going to meet the standard that it needs to meet without serious help.
Yeah. And then phrases are even worse. It's like, Anna gave her father a smirk. Anna gave her father a laugh. Anna gave her father a wink. It's like, okay, like, it's showing that it just makes you concerned. It's like, are they going to be able to give me interesting ideas, considering they're not really taking the effort to communicate these ideas in some sort of creative way that isn't going to just be mind-numbing, Yeah.
Everybody has their pet repetitions,
right?
And that's fine in your first draft. I think personally, being a pantser, I just write my draft as it flows, and I wait to knock out the stuff that I know is going to be an issue in editing, but I actively look for it, which is really helpful. So you can keep a list of here's my repetitions, or if you're using AutoCrit, you can just pull up repetition and it'll show what words you use way too much or phrases you use way too much. So like mine is, she seems this way, he seems that way. And there's a lot of twirling and whirling going on in my world. Like,
that's a really unusual tick. I like that.
Of course. They whirl to do this. And so when I go through my second draft, I'm like, okay, we don't need more than maybe 3 whirlings in the entire book. And so I go through and cut out all the different whirlings and shove them in their whirling box and send them off somewhere.
There's lots of whirling and twirling.
Yeah. But if you leave them in, it does start to make people think, oh, do they not have any other vocabulary they could use or ways to describe this feeling? And it can play into your telling versus showing too, especially things like he seems sad, which is one of my pet ones, or they seem this, they seem that. Show us the body language that makes her think he seems sad instead, and then you remove the need to say seems, and you're showing more than you're telling. And it works both ways. And AutoCrit's reports has a highlight function where you can highlight and click the thesaurus for things like grins, smiles, smirks, Chuckles, and it'll give you this whole list that you can just click on and go down the list and start making changes from smirks to other things. So
The whirling box sounds like a great title for this.
I just love the whirling is your
the
verbal
whirling
thing.
Box. Yes, nerd's right. Nerd right.
Whirling
Like
and twirling.
we're opening up the
I'm gonna take
whirling
that one.
box.
Yes, you'll normally find. I mean, I'm sure nobody actually mentioned it, which was a surprise to me in the guesses. I thought one person at least might have said too much filler, which is usually filler words. I mean, rather than info dumps or things like that. But yeah, I guess everybody is more on the ball than I thought. Because filler words, by their nature, again, they blend in. A lot of the time you can still read and it's still legible and all, but this repetition, especially of nouns, calling out the same thing over and over again, is just such an obvious amateur sign. It jumps off the page right into the eyes of anyone in an editorial position, and it's something you really, really should take care of. Especially early. Again, this goes to a lot of the things that I said before in terms of kind of front loading all your efforts. I don't want to say do that and think that's the end of it, but it's definitely worth front loading a lot of the effort in your story before it goes to submission, because that gets you over that first hurdle. And then somebody could say, okay, I got halfway through it and I really enjoyed it. It needs some work, but I'm willing to help that work, get that work done to make this deal happen, because I really like the piece. So definitely just make sure that the opening is taking care of all these three things.
Yes.
I like Jonathan's point. This is much more complicated than simply using a thesaurus. Yes, because to what Garrett's example, he was like, they went to the car and they went to the car. The solution is probably not they went to the car. The automobile, looked whatever. They opened the door to the gas guzzling. Just substituting a bunch of synonyms is probably not addressing actually the problem, because the repetitious language isn't only that you're using the same word, it's just the way you're configuring the sentences in the same manner over and over again. So it's both as concrete as what Gareth was saying, but I also think it speaks to something a little more abstract, which is just even something like, every sentence begins with, she went to the store, she opened the door, she did, it's like, it really gives you the idea that the person isn't honing in on their craft enough to be interesting, especially for any length.
Yeah. It's both grammar and word choice. And a happy balance.
But the answer is not to abuse the thesaurus.
Right.
Please no.
So we had that question come up in one of our previous live streams as well. We talked about the thesaurus, and the question was along the lines of, what if there's a word you're using that just really doesn't have a synonym? I think the examples were like ice cream and chocolate. So that took us down a whole big rabbit hole. But the idea of finding a completely different way to structure that sentence and to rework the narrative and even character actions, so you don't constantly refer to chocolate and ice cream. Like if you're really interacting with it, I'm trying to get an example, like a prop, like I do. Like I have a pen, it's blue, it's a blue pen. This is my blue pen and I love it very much, blue pen. Yes, Melissa, it was the banana split one, and that was the murder. Spoiler. But as you're interacting with it, you don't constantly think like, this is the blue pen, blue pen, blue pen.
Yeah.
It, or don't think about it at all, or don't call attention to it at all. So there is a lot of opportunity there to kind of just finesse the narrative, as I think Jonathan mentioned.
Yeah, one of my biggest things to say in that kind of regard, if we go back to the car thing, is think about the world outside. Think about the character's position within the world that's going on. So somebody opens, unlocks the car, gets in the car, puts the keys in the car's ignition, turns on the car, makes the car move, releases the handbrake. Inside all of these actions, what is possible? There's the opening the car door, there's resistance there, something the character's feeling. When they sit in and they turn on the ignition, there are lights in a car, there's sound, there's all sorts of things going on, the radio come alive. There's all these different things that happen through each of these, just each of the actions that's taken for somebody unlocking, opening a door, getting in a car and turning the car on. there's a multitude of things you can use to insinuate what's happening rather than the car did this, the car did that. They turned the car, car.
Yeah.
You know, always think like that. And it's a good way if you catch yourself out doing that with something when you're going through, especially if it's a character interacting with something. Well, then again, just get yourself in that space and imagine yourself again. Somebody mentioned earlier the kind of actor and director relationship. Imagine yourself as an actor in the middle of a scene, acting this out in a movie. What are the sights and sounds? What are the actions? Do things rattle when this object moves? You know, there's always little bit different bits of description and information and sensory input and everything that you can work in there instead of repeating the same thing over and over again.
I love the comments.
Yeah, they're talking about a lot of tropes and speaking to a lot of the tropes we're seeing. Well, it's not really a trope, but just that you often don't see these rudimentary things is because, well, you know, why? and sometimes when you have that sort of repetitive language because you're just kind of stage directing, you could be giving the audience stuff they don't really need to know, you know, and maybe it's not even a thesaurus. It's like, do they even need to know every step it took them to do something? What is it telling us about the character or their emotional state or the world or something beyond just, oh, I didn't know that's how somebody puts on a button-down shirt, you know, like, because you probably do know that, you know, so it's not necessary. Oh, thank you for the background. Yes, this is a very repetitive background image. In case you were not catching on. I go abstract with my little decor.
Just a quick little tip call out from James there. A bunch of "the" is bad to open sentences. I've done that. Yeah, that's a good tip to keep in mind. The amount of "the" sentence by sentence, you do want to try to keep that as minimal as possible.
All right. So that being said, those were some of our 3 red flags, ways to easily get rejected. Just that quick, you know, way to potentially flag your work as something that an editor or publisher or somebody analyzing it wouldn't want to read any further. But we've got more, and we've actually we've actually heard from you in those comments some of those things. So we're going to be discussing this a little bit more this month in terms of different things that we can do as writers from a mechanical standpoint, from just a writing approach standpoint, to help not turn off our readers. Essentially, you know, how to make them more interested in what we are doing. So what do we have coming up next? Does anybody want to take the reins on that?
Well,
we'll be back here Tuesday at 1 p.m.
We should be here every Tuesday, and I do want to call out Lynn. Had a really, really great guest earlier of jumping from past present tense. That comes to my mind, especially with short submissions, a very close 4th place. If I start reading and immediately you are jumping tense all over the place, then no, that's going to take more editing than I care when I'm staring down, 500 entries or submissions to any kind of piece. So yeah, that was a really, really cool. Looking at what we have coming up next.
Somebody asked for the if you are getting editing from the contest. We are working on that. There obviously were a lot of submissions, so we are going through those as quickly but carefully as we can. We want to give everybody a fair analysis and not just rush through them. So, but we are going through those at a not like I want to say breakneck speed, because we're doing it very methodically, but methodically sounds like we're being slow. So, we're doing it. What is it? It's like Gandalf. We're doing it precisely at the right amount that it needs to be.
Yes. I will be precisely prompt.
Yeah, we will be precisely on time with those critiques.
and
yes, any one of them with wait length, it'll be worth the wait.
And then I see the comment on whether we're still letting people purchase those. I can't even talk. We do have our story inspections that are open all the time. You can go to author services on our AutoCrit website. That's www.autocrit.com, and just go to author services and click story inspections and submit any story size. It does not have to be from the contest. It's a penny a word, so you can drop your story in there. And I think there's a minimum on there too. But yeah, so if you want feedback and you missed submitting it, go in and send us a story inspection or a first chapter critique.
Oh,
Cool.
Somebody's asking us to talk the 3 again. The 3 we had, for just a little summary, was not following guidelines, having a weak opening hook, and immediate repetitious language. Just reading some of these comments here.
Yeah, I was just looking at that.
I can see, looking from our schedule, yep, we will be in touch with everybody in the usual manner by email, or if you're a member on Mighty Networks with events, we'll be back next week with 3 more red flags, getting a bit more deeper into the piece. So today's really is about those things to front load, to make sure we're always going on at the beginning before your piece lands in anybody's hands in a professional sense. And we will get a little deeper next week. To keep you all in the loop as well, the week after that, we have a brand new What's the Score Live, announcing a new author coming to AutoCrit this month. Not giving away any clues or anything just yet.
Come on.
No,
Not even a slight amount. It's somebody that has written words.
They have written stories.
Intriguing.
And they probably haven't violated these 3 red flags because, they got published. So there you go.
we may have more information next week. And the week after that, we are hoping to put together a little infrastructure here to do a live stream where we will actually read your submitted first lines and let you know what your opening hooks are like. So we'll do that live. If anybody's been to our show Pitch It and kind of pitch their story ideas, you'll know the format. So we'll get a way for you to submit your lines, and then we'll bring them on and do as many as we can, really live in one session, and give you some ideas and tips for those hooks, because you really want to get over that first hurdle. That's kind of what we're all about here.
Great opening hook lines. Sounds like a good idea. Well,
Brad. That one is not ours. That's Rain's, the other writing challenge.
Oh, yeah. Okay, got it.
I saw other comments in terms of when are we doing. We're going to say something about the next one.
I was wondering about Brad.
Oh, another challenge that you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Brad had a question in the chat about.
Are we ever going to announce another challenge? Yes, we will at some point announce another challenge. That is correct.
Daniel. The best part of
smart.
Yeah, Jonathan's always making me into the tough one. I don't know where I got this reputation. I am a very nice person, Jonathan.
Makes me think of Jillian Michaels, and she's like, "That's a nice one." Like, yeah.
That was the quote of the century from Pitch It, was it? I think it was the best for your service. Where's your pit? There's no pit.
I love it.
Your story has no pit.
I actually need to head out every once. So
yeah.
Okay. Well, that is arranged. We will be in touch. In terms of our next writing challenges, we will hopefully watch this space. Be running another challenge next month. It won't be the writing challenge including the anthology, like we do now. Well, just did for this round. It'll be the return of Destination Unknown. So I get to be all super nasty and set up some twists and rules for everybody. If you haven't done that before, be prepared.
There's no follow on to that. Just be we can't. That's all we can give you at this moment is be prepared.
Let's see if anybody in the comments say, sounds ominous.
Oh dear, Lori says. Yikes.
It may be. So yes, plenty going on throughout the next few weeks, and of course into next month. So yeah, stick with us. We'll, of course, as per always, keep you updated by email. And if you're an AutoCrit Pro member, we'll see you in Mighty Networks and share the events there and have a good chat about everything. If you're not currently a member, why? Get over there. Get yourself an AutoCrit Pro subscription. We have a private community as well where we do all this extra stuff. So
come join the party.
Yes.
I was thinking for the anthology, we could possibly, if we get a photo of all of the winners and have an auto version of them drawn.
yourself. Yeah,
Auto yourself.
auto yourself.
Oh goodness. And we had one final thing we wanted to mention before we got off today.
We did.
Yeah.
Of the spotlight, Beth, we do have some news for the community.
You do it, Gareth. You do it. So if you're in the horror class, this does not apply to you. But if you are just a member of our AutoCrit community or just a fan watching us live on YouTube, this is going to be probably my last public live stream with AutoCrit. Now I am staying on with the horror course for a while. So if you haven't signed up for the horror course, you can still spend time with me and Gareth together. But I am going to step down a little bit and am taking on some other responsibilities in life. So I will miss you all so much. And I may be back for look at all the chat. Oh my God, you guys. Beware the spoons are coming. That's right, Andrea. I am so thankful to you guys. And I might still be back for special broadcasts. We're not going to rule that out. But yeah, Dory says, no, I don't write horror. Just a little horror aspect. You could still join us. So thank you all so, so much. And I'll see you again soon. Stop. Okay, stop. Gareth, bring out the spotlight. Thank you.
Bye. Pull you away. Yes, a big thank you to Beth for being with us for so long. Ever since the really beginning of doing all these live streams and kicking things off with AutoCrit Live and building the community in such a fabulous manner. Can't thank you enough, Beth. And I'm super glad that Beth is staying on with horror because she's my right hand over there. But yes,
I control the PowerPoint. Oh, you guys. Okay, stop. We got to go. Okay.
We will go. Thank you all for coming. We'll see you next week and see you around the community.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.